Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar, The Rise of Social Video, Unlock the Power of Video in Pharma Communication, sponsored by LiveWorld. I'm Michelle Benz, Conference Production Director, and I'll be introducing this webinar. I'd like to start off today by introducing today's speakers. We have Jenna Dengrove, VP Creative Director at LiveWorld, Trisha Kashima, Media Director at LiveWorld, and Jessica Pansini, Head of U.S. Social Media at Sanofi. Now, you can see their full bios on the left side of your window by selecting the Speakers tab. Now, just a few moments before we begin, I have a few notes I want to make sure we share. The first is we have additional resources for today's presentation. Please select the Handouts tab button on the left-hand side of your screen to view these handouts. You can also use closed captions by using the bottom right corner of the video player and selecting closed captions. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to watch on demand within 24 hours. We'd also love to hear from you. During the presentation, please submit any questions you have using the Question and Answers tab on the left-hand side of your screen. We'll take your questions live at the end of the webinar and we'll conclude with a Q&A session. Now let's begin. Thank you for joining us, Trisha, Jenna, and Jessica.
Thank you, everybody. We're going to get started. Trisha's going to start us off here.
Yeah, thank you so much for the warm introduction, and welcome to everyone who is joining the webinar. I'm going to take you through a timeline of the evolution of the digital landscape. The pandemic changed everything. We just experienced one of the most transformative periods in modern history. The pandemic wasn't just a health crisis, but also a pivotal moment that reshaped the digital landscape. The need for connection drove entirely new groups of people to join and participate in social and digital channels. Before the pandemic, pharma digital content seemed almost perfected. Think couples holding hands on the beach with polished images and finely tuned messaging. The pandemic, however, changed the public's expectations towards a much more authentic content. We saw talk show hosts like Jimmy Fallon, Seth Meyers, and Jimmy Kimmel filming their shows from their homes and giving us a glimpse of their real world. The expectation shifted from what's perfect to what's real and authentic. In addition, as health resources were so taxed, more and more people began seeking health information online. Social media platforms saw a remarkable surge as they became even more critical hubs for health-related news, support groups, and discussions. One of the key drivers of the surge was short-form video. While we all needed entertainment, we pulled out our phones to try the trendiest dance challenges and also to try our hands at the latest recipes. Video was just more engaging, personal, and it had the power to communicate complex topics in a digestible manner. The appetite for real and raw videos from that point forward has increased, changing the way pharma needs to communicate. While the pandemic accelerated the change, digital platforms have been steadily paving the way with this kind of engagement for years. Think back to the days of AOL. Communication was evolving even then. Platform like Blogger, Reddit, and YouTube entered this market using long-form content that brought new form, in-depth yet personal communication in the digital space. So think of long-form videos and channels. We then saw platforms like Instagram, Pinterest, and Tumblr take over, giving us an unprecedented platform to visually interact directly with our followers. Then came Vine, Snapchat, and the rise of more video on existing platforms. By the time TikTok entered the scene, we were definitely ready. It was as if every platform before was preparing us for this moment of immense digital growth and transformation. While the pharma industry was sometimes slow to adopt each platform and evolution along the way, we are at an inflection point where pharma must catch up to the current video phenomenon to remain relevant with our audiences. And now I'm going to hand it over to Jenna.
Thanks, Trisha. So let's talk a little bit about, now that we've gotten here, the things that we need to take into account when we're thinking about video content. So a couple of key points that we want to go over. So shorter attention spans are definitely real. And so since about the year 2000, the average attention span of a person has actually dropped from about 12 seconds to 8 seconds. So that becomes really critical when we're making video, that we capture someone's attention in the first couple of seconds. Otherwise, we'll have lost them. The second is the vertical video formatting that has really grown into popularity. By the late 2010s, many online platforms actually began embracing the use of vertical video because of the growing use of mobile devices. And so we've actually seen a growth from 5% of video viewing in that vertical format to almost 30% in 2015, and around 93% now. So it's really important that you take that into account. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later if you're actually shooting content, so that you have enough content to shoot for or to edit for the various formats that you might need. Next is that short form video domination. That really started with Vine, like Trisha was talking about back in 2012, and now is just absolutely exploded with TikTok during the pandemic. TikTok time average on site is about 27 minutes, and that's the highest of all social platforms. And if you're anything like me, once you're in the zone of TikTok, you're in there for a while. Then improving algorithms. So in the wake of the success of TikTok and the, For You page that shows the most engaging content, social platforms have really improved their algorithms to serve us the content that they think will be most relevant for us to keep us on sites. And so I know that's really true for me. There's almost nothing that's identical. If I'm sitting in the same room as my best friend and we're scrolling on TikTok, none of our feed is actually the same. So that algorithm has really become very, very smart. And then humanizing conditions, probably everyone in this room has seen that happening. We've seen a really seismic shift that I think really started with the age of TikTok, and it's part of that authenticity movement. So with this younger generation of content creators being more comfortable sharing personal information in the public and saying, look at me, I have this condition, or this is my favorite brand of something, that is becoming more and more comfortable for people to sort of make what was once maybe very private, very public. And so that has crossed over the threshold into healthcare, where people are much more comfortable talking about a condition and are really finding camaraderie in sharing that information. And then last but not least, we see this diversification of content. We have more ways than ever at this point to engage with our audiences, more tools. There's polls, there's quizzes, there's interactive content, there's buttons, stickers that you can add on things like Instagram stories. And so with the rollout of each new feature becomes more and more availability for us to reach our audiences in different ways. So all those things are items to take into account when it comes to video content creation. And so with that said, while we might have various goals for our content, depending on what our brand might be and what kind of content is available for us to put out, our audience is really consuming in place. And so whether your goal is awareness and linking to your website, or engagement and taking an action, it's really important to understand our audiences. And because they're far more engaged in this short format video, we want to make sure that we highlight that here. So you can see on the left side that short form video content is really become king at this point in the landscape. Another thing that we talk a lot about here at Live World is the story arc when it comes to storytelling and social. And you can see that script has really flipped when we talk about creating content. We now live in a world of instant gratification and getting to the heart of the topic right away. The first 5 to 10 seconds of a piece of content is really all you have to get someone's attention. We talk a lot here about the not only thumb stopping power of content, but the thumb rewinding power of content. If something is really interesting, the goal is actually to get someone to scroll back up to that piece of content and watch it. And that really comes into play when we talk about the story arc. So in that long form content, like Trisha talked about when we first were looking at video, like on YouTube, the arc was this very bell curve approach of starting with the issue and working your way up to the apex of the problem or the pinnacle and that breaking point, and then coming back down in a nice soft landing. Now you see that curve on the right-hand side. We need to start high. We need to start right off the bat with something that's going to grab their attention and get someone interested in what the topic is we're talking about. If we're lucky enough for them to stay with us past that, we can usually get them through to the point of that resolution and drive them to a website or to take a supplemental action to maybe watch the full story online if we're showing a snippet of it, or learn more about a certain topic by driving to a particular part of a website or taking a quiz. So it's really important to understand the difference in the story arc when you're creating your content. So a couple of key things to plan out when you're thinking about social video and the components of that. There's this plan phase. Like I just said, that script has to be flipped for social video, and that's going to require a little bit different type of planning before your shoot, because you need to make sure you're building that story in the way that your consumers or your audience are going to take it in. There's that create line item where we're crafting tailored content for each social platform. So we're blending the unique platform characteristics, whether that's TikTok and trends like the pointing, or Instagram and little stickers that we might put on there, with your brand's voice. And it's not a one size fits all. The content that you create for Facebook will not necessarily translate to Instagram or to TikTok. So you have to make sure you're tailoring that content appropriately. Then when it comes to shooting and capturing that content, we need to make sure we're shooting for a video that's going to stop your scroll or rewind your scroll, like I said, captivate someone's interest instantly. And that can be anything from the story to really striking visuals or really interesting graphics, or even a statistic that's really bold. And then lastly, connect, bringing your audience together and fostering those connections, encouraging those interactions. If you are going to be able to have comments on, and I realize that not everyone is comfortable with that, we can talk to that later too, but if you can, the age of bringing people together to talk about like-minded topics is what gets us the results to move forward and create more content that meets the needs we're hearing in the market. And Trisha's going to talk to that later as well. So with that all said and setting the stage, we're going to actually share some examples now that help illustrate some of the points that we've been discussing. And so I'm going to get started, and we're going to sort of bounce around between all of us to talk about some of these actual pieces of work. So on this first slide here, what I want to focus on is that video actually has the ability to take many different formats. It's not only the interview style footage or the talking head, as we like to call it. There's lots of different ways to use video to engage, and that traditional interview style is just one of them. So here we're just going to sort of whet your appetite with a couple of other formats, since I think everyone's probably used to the talking heads video. One of them is for a brand launch, and we had actually almost no product, no assets to use at that point, because we were still very early on in the creation process of assets. And so we had to come up with something interesting, and you'll see when we play that in a moment what that what format that actually took. And the one on the right actually uses audio, because even if you do a content capture and you have lots of video content, there's ways to use that content in different formats that may actually provide more variance, so that your audience doesn't think they're seeing the same thing over and over and over, because we want to keep them interested. So that one actually uses audio clip and pairs it with some interesting animation to keep the user's attention. So I'm going to let John play these clips really quickly so we can see these examples live. So this is the one I was talking about first, and you can see the confetti actually morphs into the product logo, and then that allows us to bring our message forward. And that one's good. And then we'll go to the next video example that we talked about.
My name is Allison, and I have acromegaly. One of the worst parts of living with this disease has been my SSA injections. But sometimes it's hard to explain these struggles to your doctor. Maybe you're not sure what to say. Maybe you feel like you're not being heard. So I'm going to act out a conversation with a doctor. You can hear how I advocate for myself, even in the face of several challenges.
Perfect. So you can see how that came together and uses different formats. We actually did a full shoot with Allison. It was about 3 hours of content, and that's just one little clip that came together in a different format. So let's talk a little bit about some other examples then that talk to that storytelling. So here on this slide, we have a couple of different examples of when the script has been flipped for social, like we talked about earlier. This short format storytelling, this very vertical video format, and really understanding your audience and where they are, addressing a key topic in the first 10 to 15 seconds and getting someone's attention to hopefully pique their interest and then drive them to take another action, like visiting your website. And then also, again, making sure you're planning ahead, not only for the format you're shooting your video in, but for your talent contracts, that you're going to use the content for maybe a long form video that lives on a brand website, but also short form video that's going to live on social, and making sure that all of those licenses cover you for social as well. So with that, we're going to play this example on the left here.
You dirty? And I was like, hell yeah, I took a shower this morning. Just the word itself, it shows a lack of understanding of what STDs are. It doesn't really ask the right questions.
Right.
Well, I'm clean. Are you? You dirty? And I was like, hell yeah, I took a shower this morning. Just the.
So we can play the next one then. This is the Otezla example. And this uses that pointing trend that I mentioned earlier. So this, is a new format or a new kind of content that really is a way to use some interesting graphics and not actually need sound. We know a lot of people watch video and consume content online with the sound off. So this is a great way to be able to showcase some brand messaging. And it's perfect.
So for this slide, and I represent Sanofi. So what I do at Sanofi is manage the US corporate channels. So we're corporate, we're above brand. So whereas Jenna has shared some examples of some branded content, our team gets the fun kind of privilege of telling above brand stories by showcasing employees, by highlighting what they do at Sanofi, and also telling a little bit of their personal stories. So with the foray of TikTok, Sanofi just got onto TikTok last year. We've really been amping up our video usage. And one of the ways that we found to be successful using video, especially in a very compliant area, is latching onto trends. So trends are a really good way, if they're done the right way, to capture your audience's attention and showcase the people behind those stories, showcase your science, showcase who you are as an employer. So one of our favorite videos that we've done recently is latching onto this, of course, trend, which I am sure most of you have probably seen. Kim Kardashian's done it. I have to bring her up because hers is very funny. And we thought, what a great way to talk a little bit about our scientists in this, we're scientists, of course we XYZ. So we're going to show you a clip from the first video here.
We're scientists. Of course we're in cell culture more than on our cell phones.
We're scientists. Of course our friends always ask us to diagnose them.
We're scientists. Of course we have 3 pairs of safety glasses in our lab coat.
We're scientists. Of course our hands start to cramp from pipetting all day.
We're scientists. Of course we have bad posture from leaning over the bench all day.
We're scientists. Of course we love what we do.
Perfect. So that was just like a really fun way, again, to kind of marry what's trending and employee stories, storytelling, highlighting our people, highlighting our science, highlighting what we do. Another way that we've done this is by doing this a day in the life trend. So in the second video, which we're not going to play, but I'll just speak to, is showcasing this woman, Janetta, who works in one of our labs. And she kind of takes you around. This is what I do, put on my lab coat, go into the lab. I do pipetting and whatever those smart scientists do all day. And it kind of gives you a sneak peek into why Sanofi is a cool place to work. And then on the example on the right, this is actually a video of a woman, Curie. She works at Sanofi, and she also is a hemophilia patient. So she's telling two stories, two really important stories. And I think the trend here is just really like that dichotomy of her being a young girl diagnosed with hemophilia, and then her speaking about that experience today as, you know, a woman in her 20s, and how the importance of community really kind of fostered her, her ability to kind of make it through her diagnosis, and, you know, why she is the way that she is today. And then here are just a couple other examples about how to think of how to get your videos successful. So framing and dimension, I think Jenna spoke before that the way that you would tailor your video to specific platforms, you would do that same for dimensions as well. So each video on each channel and each placement needs to have specific dimensions in order for it to really work and feel authentic. Accessibility through subtitles, that's just something that we should always be doing. It's our standard across Sanofi, and it just helps bring that message through, and it helps make sure that that message resonates with everybody. If you are including ISI in your video, making sure that that is clear and compliant. We all know ISI takes like a million hours to run through, but you have to have it. So just making sure that that is prominent in your video if you do use it. Making sure that the person's title and who they are and why it's important to the topic that they're speaking to, that needs to be upfront right in the beginning, so that that doesn't get lost. And then again, back to those platform nuances, what works well in TikTok might not necessarily work well on Facebook. So understanding those specific details will help your videos be successful.
Excellent. So I'm going to go through a couple of more examples with Jessica here. So this pairing on the left here will play as well. The goal here is to talk a little bit about making the videos fun and relatable. So positioning the talent to look like they're in a natural environment or as natural as possible is becoming more and more important, especially like Trisha said, after COVID and after everything changed, and that high production value of content, the expectation becoming more this sort of self-shot or really DIY type of content. And even the example Jessica showed with the Of Course that was filmed by their offices. So it's creating more relatable content by doing that. And so the example, when we play it on the left, you'll see it's not in English, but just to illustrate the point of putting someone in more of a homey environment instead of in a lab coat behind a desk. And that was, I think, an HCP example. And the example on the right, again, speaks to this, make it clean, make it a really nice visual, but not antiseptic, not so staged. So this actually is an example of content from a shoot we did and put together. Again, we had about a 3-hour shoot. We not only created 2 long form videos from this, but we actually created several pieces of social content for a campaignable cluster of ads. And so that is a perfect way of talking about capturing way more content than you need. Even if you're going to shoot for a long form video that's going to live on a website with a discussion of a specific topic, use the opportunity that you have in that time that you have with your subjects to think about what other content, if we were going to do social with this content, what would be great to ask them that maybe it wouldn't make the cut of the long form video, but it's a perfect soundbite for social, and use every opportunity to its fullest advantage in doing that. And then the other thing is using music that adds to the story without overpowering it. I think TikTok, really capitalizes on this trend by allowing you to add music to every video, but that should really be done as much as possible, as much as the content lends to it in regular content, even if it's not on TikTok. So I'm going to let John play the example on the left here quickly.
ไขข้อจะฉีดฟิลเลอร์ปากครั้งแรกควรรู้อะไรบ้างผมขอแบ่งเป็นข้อๆแบบนี้เลยครับข้อหนึ่งนะครับรู้ใจตัวเองก่อนครับเพราะปัจจุบันนี้เนี่ยมีหลายเทคนิคหลายวิธีการฉีดมากต้องรู้ก่อนนะครับว่าเราต้องการรูปปากแบบไหนวอลลุ่มมากน้อยแค่ไหนนะครับยิ่งถ้ามี reference ให้คุณหมอได้จะดีมากๆเลย
Just to give you a flavor of that and how, the little pop-ups, little sound effects, that was from TikTok. And then the example on the right.
Real Food Blends has helped mealtime feel like family time because of the options. I know how important food is, for me and for my family, but just being able to have that inclusivity, it helps us feel, connected still, and we can still enjoy food together, even though we're giving it to her differently. It's a beautiful thing to be able to feel good about what you are putting into your child's body.
Great. And then two more examples here of bringing the audience in. And that was a really good segue with that video we just watched. Being authentic and really representing the condition in a real way, and making sure you're talking to your audience with people that reflect the actual demographic of your audience. And that can be age, gender, race, whatever it might be. But make sure you're reflecting your audience, because they want to see other people that look, sound, and think like they do, to have that content resonate. Building trust by featuring content creators that have, like I said, that actual condition when you can. Trying to make sure to keep emotion at the heart of everything you do. And emotion doesn't have to be sad. It can be hopeful. It can be funny. Just remember that the emotion is really king, and highlighting those shared experiences, including pain points. Don't shy away from the hard stuff, because that's often the content that gets a lot of engagement. So we're going to quickly play these examples. So the first one here is for Discovery.
I think that seeing someone who looks like you, speaks like you, and shares a similar story can help others within my Hispanic community.
Great. And so that's just a quick example, just a little quick sound bite, but it's enough for someone to think, this is me, like, let me see more of this person's story. And then the example on the right is for a different brand. This is unbranded content for disease awareness, but just talking to, again, some topics that aren't always the easiest to talk to, but are very real and relevant.
I ended up finding out that I did have Fabry disease. I was frustrated. I was confused. I was broken. My geneticist said, I am here to help you. I will never forget those words. Surround yourself with those who are going to encourage you to continue to push through, to tell you it's going to be okay, and live life to its fullest.
Perfect.
And to wrap up our video examples, so here are a few more videos. On the left, and to preface, these videos are kind of looking at how to think outside of the box. So we looked at trends, and we looked at kind of some ways to share branded messages, which I know there aren't too many ways because of compliance and regulations and all that. But how can you kind of think outside the box while still telling your story? So the video on the left here is a get ready with me video. And that concept isn't exactly an outside of the box concept. We've all seen it done a million times, a million different ways. But what this woman is doing is she has painted Sanofi's own meningitis flag on her face. So we came together, the global team at Sanofi came together, and in support of the meningitis community, developed this flag with this look and these colors. And she kind of was painting her face as she was talking about this community and stressing the importance. So it was just a really, really cool way to kind of showcase both areas there. And then in the center, I don't know if some of you are familiar with ASMR, but it's a trend that took off a few years ago and it's still going pretty strong. But it basically uses audio sensory cues to kind of relax you and tap into kind of this like Zen state. So we thought, well, why not tell our story of our scientists and our science using that trend? So we're going to play a clip of that video here, and make sure you have your audio up for this one. So that resonates with some people. For me, it's a little creepy, but it worked. So what we did was we really just, again, for this specific, we did 2 video series. And for this specific series, we went into our lab and we did like test tubes, we did micro centrifuges and kind of collected all these noise from our labs. And then for our second series, we went into our manufacturing facility and recorded like blister packs being stamped and bottles being filled. So again, just kind of a different way to think about how we can tell our story of Sanofi, which includes our science and also our manufacturing facilities that we have at the company. And then the last example on the right is a campaign called No Jargon, which the global team at Sanofi worked on. And it basically asks 3 scientists to define a complicated term or some scientific notion in a simplified way. So they're really kind of putting something complex, a complex idea into layman's terms. And again, just to help kind of share that scientific story and reach a broader audience and kind of show that Sanofi is a cool place to work.
Excellent. So the thing I'm sure on a lot of people's minds, depending on the kind of content you work on, is compliance. So before we get into some thought starters for you on an approach you can take to start creating a video specifically for social, we wanted to talk a little bit about this hot topic because this is definitely something that we contend with in the work that we do a lot here at Live World. And we have worked on some projects and have some thoughts on best practices and things you can do to help your cause when it comes to your reviews. So the first thing is wanting to make sure that there is the proper scrolling ISI and the proper balance to the content that you are creating. So that means the ISI needs to be a certain proportion in font size. The scroll speed needs to be slow enough to be able to read. And you want to take into account the formatting for the different platform types. So for example, on Facebook, the video content, usually we have a little bit longer, but on Instagram, there's a cap of 2 minutes. So you just have to take those different nuances into account. Then links to the full PI. So it's important to make sure that you have that link out. PI needs to be one click away. And so that usually comes in the format of post copy. And there are certain ad types on different platforms for having clickable PI in different spots. So that's really a platform by platform nuance, but it's something to take into account to make sure you're able to adhere to that rule. And again, like we talked to, those various content formats that need to be taken into account. Like Jessica said, the formatting for a Facebook post can look very, very different than a story, for example, on Facebook or Instagram or a TikTok or a skippable ad. So we need to take all of that formatting into account as well. And the more that you can set up documents for your review teams that take them through the process, because they themselves may not be users of particular platforms and may not have that firsthand experience or knowledge of knowing how the interface works. That is key, we have found, to success in really making them part of the discovery process and part of the process of laying out that content. So then when it comes back to them at the end, when you're actually submitting it for final review, there's really not surprises. We also want to talk about age and geographic restrictions, different platforms, different capabilities there as well. But geo-targeting is a perfect example of that, where you can have ads serve only in a specific region or location. For example, if you have a certain hospital or centers of excellence that you want to just target people around those areas, that is actually possible, and sometimes is a great way to test creative before you push it out to a wider audience. And of course, underscoring the whole thing is AE moderation. If you have comments on, that is something that we highly encourage to have comments on, because like I said, it creates that dynamic cycle of feedback in your content, so you can learn and improve, see what your audience is resonating with, and then make more content in that space. But having comments on means needing to moderate, and also part of that moderation is AE moderation, and making sure that that process is buttoned up and totally solid. And if anyone has specific questions about moderation or AE management, we can set up time to talk separately, because that's a whole other thing, that arm of LiveWorld that we do. And we have several presentations around that, so we can dive into that more deeply for anyone who needs it. But these are just a couple of thought starters and things that we need to make sure that we're adapting to when it's related to compliance. The other thing when you're talking about video with compliance is making sure you're taking all of the things into account that are maybe not the front and center things. So we're going to learn from a couple of examples here that we wanted to share. And specifically, the first example on the left is something that might not be that obvious. So there was is a drug called Duobri, I think that's how you say it. It's a topical lotion for psoriasis. And the important thing to note here is that there is an indication for harm to fetus and photosensitivity. And so in their video content, there was actually a piece that was shown on a daytime talk show where there was a patient seen outside at a park with her children, and she's wearing a top that exposes her shoulders and a great deal of her arms. But that risk of sun exposure is increasing her potential to have sunburn from that indication. And that's not included anywhere in the video. It's not noted even in a footnote or a slate in the middle that breaks through the content. And so that sort of was the first issue. And then the second, compounding that misinformation, was the patient actually says, coworkers, my husband, my kids, even my students would notice my elbows. So I would wear a lot of 3/4 length shirts, even when it was warm outside. But the statement there indicates that she doesn't need to take any extra measures to avoid sun exposure. It doesn't talk about covering up. It doesn't talk about extra sunscreen applications, when clearly that's part of the profile of the medication. And then the other thing is that the video actually failed to include material on the facts about embryo fetal risk. And so the warning from the label includes guidance that women of childbearing age should obtain a pregnancy test within 2 weeks prior to beginning the medication. And the letter goes on to say that the omission of that disclaimer, given this patient clearly appears to be of childbearing age and is seen with 2 very young children, is an issue as well. So it's not only what you say in the video, but the B-roll is important as well. So things like that need to be considered. And on the right-hand side, this example was an audio. So this was an interview that a CEO gave. And in that interview, he said our critically ill population in the United States, when we gave them a dose of this particular medication, the survival rate was 78%. Once we gave them another dose, the survival rate went up to 82%. But then he goes on to say, imagine if 78% went up to 82%, the next one may be 88 and the next one 95. And I'm just making up numbers, but if it goes into those kind of numbers and follows the same pattern, it would be fantastic. And that's not scientific data. And so that was really problematic because it's giving efficacy claims that aren't actually factual. So those are different things that need to be taken into account. What I would say on the example for the right, for anyone that may be doing webinars, a lot of times what we do here at Live World is we do a discussion guide, which we take through legal review, because having too scripted of a webinar can feel inauthentic, but you also want to make sure that you're maintaining proper guardrails and guide rails for the content. So we often do a discussion guide accompanied by a list of watchouts and phrases that need to be avoided. And so we pre-record using specific platforms. We can then edit and make sure that our video is compliant and then serve it up through a platform that pushes it out in a way that seems live, but actually it's been pre-recorded. But in the interview process, we do the interview process in a way that makes it feel very authentic and like it is live. So when it does go live, even if it's a week later, it feels the same live atmosphere that it would if it was actually fully live. So with those 2 examples, now you may be thinking, how do I get started? And so we're going to take you through a couple of thought starters on like a crawl, walk, run approach for anyone that may be interested in dipping their toe in, but maybe not be ready for the full shebang just yet. So we'll start with crawl.
Yeah, and if you're starting from scratch and it feels a little overwhelming, you can always assess what assets you already have. Chances are you have a bank of digital assets that you could maybe use in its original format or tweak a little bit to use on social media. There are several social media platforms, so chances are one of those will fit in. But I think even more importantly, from a start perspective, is understanding from the start what your objectives are. And briefs help with that. I think a brief is a really good way to kind of get everybody, yourself, your strategist, your creative team, all on the same page. What do you want to achieve with this content? Who's your audience? How are you measuring impact? What your KPIs are? And what platforms you think the content will best perform on. If you start in a successful manner that way, chances are your content will be successful. So that would be my initial recommendation if you're starting with the crawl phase.
Excellent. And for the walk phase, we want to look at the content that you may already have too, and do this content by design. So plan and execute new programs to fit into those social channels, building on that crawl phase. And that can be things like we just talked about, these edited webinars. Then you're looking at also patient stories, and that can be filming them from the get-go, or it can be stories that already exist and taking that footage and trying to use it in new and different ways. So perhaps it's an interview that already exists and you can make some different types of content from that. Maybe it's using the audio clips. Maybe it's animating something that didn't exist as animation before. Maybe it's adding new B-roll to it. So think about what you have and how you can maximize it. And that also goes for animation. So one of the most eye-catching things that we have is color and big and text. And so we can try to use those pieces, and video doesn't, like I said in the beginning, have to only be the interview style footage. There's lots of ways to combine assets to make something really compelling. And I'll let Trisha go to the next one.
And we've shown you a ton of options in this presentation. I think what we want to emphasize is that you don't need a large creative budget to really get started. Once you have established your brand and have a following, there's options to include followers in the conversation, or in Sanofi's example, use your own employees, even people working at the company, to be a part of the conversation as well. Content can also be fun and interactive. Think of quizzes and knowledge tests where users can interact with the brand in non-traditional ways. That's a great way of getting the audience even further invested in your brand and becoming followers and fans of your brand. And also, I think as a media person, I think it's really important to emphasize to turn to your agency partners and create a strong measurement plan when creating these campaigns. You're investing a ton of money into these campaigns. You want to make sure that your key KPIs are being met and optimized to ensure success.
Excellent.
So thank you for everybody for attending, and I think we just want to open it up for questions.
Ooh, Michelle, you're muted.
Yeah, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thanks, guys.
That's okay.
So we have a lot of great questions already, but for anyone who still has questions and wants to submit them, please go to the left-hand side of your screen, click on that Q&A tab, and drop your question for our panelists now. So the first question we have for our audience is, as best practices continue to trend towards shorter videos, as you mentioned, how can we meet that standard within MLR landscape?
I can start. Jessica seems like you may have some things to jump in here. So the thing to remember with the video content being shorter and shorter is you don't have to say everything at once. You can really do what we call reminder style videos too, that tease something without getting into all of the claims data. So if you can find a nugget that's compelling, like, for example, I've been on X medication for a certain number of years and I'm not changing. Learn more about this person's story by clicking here. You really haven't given too much information. You haven't really made any claims there. And even if there's a slight disclaimer needed on that, like medication may not work for everyone or something, you can do that in a footnote, but then drive to the full website for the rest of the information or the full video of that particular patient. So it depends how short you need to go, or maybe in that crawl, walk, run phase you're wanting to test the waters on. Not everything has to be a 30-second even video. Jessica, I don't know if you had something to add there.
Yeah, the only thing to add on to that is to bring your reviewers into the game plan ahead of time. So make sure that they're part of the conception. Make sure that you're gut checking content development with them along the way. And then this way, when you go and you present your materials for review, they're not caught off guard, and fingers crossed that you'll have an easier approval process.
I completely agree with that. We actually, on many of our brands, we involve the reviewers in even the kickoff call. So they know what's in development, what's going to be coming their way. And if there's a topic even that from that point of that kickoff call just seems like it's going to raise a lot of red flags, we can discuss it then and evaluate, is there a way to do that in format that content or voice that content in a way that everyone's going to be able to get comfortable with, or do we need to pivot and find a new way in? So I totally echo Jessica's comment there. The earlier you can involve your reviewers, the better. And a lot of times when we have shoots, we have a reviewer on the shoot with us, whether it's a remote shoot and they're on the live stream so they can be listening and watching, or if it's in person, even better. But it's a lot easier to have those things addressed in the moment if there are concerns than have to try to retrofit later.
We have another question. If the algorithms have become smarter, do video creators need to do something specific to ensure they're showing up with the intended audience?
I mean, I would say no. I think in order to track how you're showing up with your audience, you need to measure the impact. So I think it's just a test and learn approach. So you test, you learn, you optimize, and then you continue to do what works. And that's always going to change because social media always changes. So I would say just take that approach continuously.
There's a couple more I want to get to as well. Is there any benefit to organic pages for pharma on platforms like Facebook and Instagram, or should we be focusing on ads exclusively?
I will start there, and then if Trisha or Jessica want to jump in, they can. There's a really great benefit to having the organic content. First of all, if somebody gets your ad in their feed because they've been targeted to potentially receive that sponsored content, that paid content, and they think, oh, this brand speaks to me, or I should look into this brand, then they're going to immediately go to your page. That may be your website, but it also may be your Facebook or Instagram page. And if they show up on that page and there's no content there, if it's just all blank, it can be a bit of a turnoff. And so the ultimate goal, right, is to get these people into your stream and get them to be following your page, because then they'll see your organic content in their feed. Using things like hashtagging and different tactics in organic is important too, and I'd be happy to have an offline conversation about that. But I would say for sure, if you can produce organic content, then that is a great plus. The thing to note is the restrictions, the different formatting types, the things that you need to take into account with how organic content previews. For example, if you're on Instagram and you're in the grid view, all of your content is going to be square. So if you're creating tall content, which is great for your paid ads and what you should be optimizing to for paid, you might need to also then adapt that content to be square for organic. And that you have to work with your agency partners to make sure that the content is being adjusted appropriately, both in visual and in text, because remember, in an ad, you're going to have the CTA link on the bottom where the user can click to go to whatever directive you're asking them to take. But on organic, that button doesn't exist. So on organic Facebook, you may need to put a link, whether it's a URL or a bit.ly or something like an Instagram story. You can do the link sticker button to take them where you're trying to go. So it's just a matter, like we said earlier, of knowing the platform and the nuances of each to make sure you're catering that organic content to actually work hard for you. And Trisha, I don't know if you have anything from a media metric standpoint to add.
But I just love when you mentioned that, brands that just do paid advertising and have nothing on their organic page. Facebook pages and Instagram pages are a great way it's like a job interview, how people are going to, you creating those authentic connections. That's a great way to get the lead, the paid lead. And what do you do with that paid lead? For example, how are you going to nurture it and grow? That's something that in measurement that you have to think about. Is not just about getting the person to the page, but how are they going to be a long-term fan? And that's the way organic content works with paid content.
We have another good question. Can you speak to how to expedite medical or legal review for multiple applications of the same or similar video assets, like those created from a single long shoot?
Yes. So 2 parts to that. If there's one particular asset that you're trying to use in multiple ways, we bundle those together in one review document. So we may do, let's call it ad 25 featuring Jessica. We're going to show what's the paid Facebook version of that ad. How is that ad then adjusted for paid Instagram? How is it adjusted for organic Facebook and Instagram or TikTok or whatever other placements we may have? Bundle it all together. Because if the review team sees the paid Facebook ad alone in a silo, and then 2 weeks later, you're sending through the paid Instagram or the organic Instagram, they may have a comment that would have been answered by the first document reviewed. And so coupling all of those together, if it's the same piece of footage being adapted different ways, I would put it all through one review process. But as far as creating different pieces from the same shoot, those need to be submitted. Like if you're going to have a long form video, I would submit that first, use that as the base. Then when you do supplemental videos, if you're going to take a section of that long form video and use it for a shorter piece of social content, you'd want to tag in the long form that's already been reviewed and everyone signed off on as a related material in what I would assume everyone's using, Viva, promo mats, to make sure that the reviewers are remembering, oh yeah, we already discussed this one point. We aligned on these steps. We've already executed that. I see it's been followed through on this other piece as well. So if it's the same piece of content, I would suggest bundling it. If it's a first piece of content with supplemental content, I would suggest doing one piece first and then trying to fast follow with the rest so that you're only making, if there's a change pointed out, you're only making it once and then carrying it through on additional pieces. That's would be my recommendation.
All right, so we have time for one last question, I think. In what ways tools can you use to track or monitor the effectiveness of the videos?
Trisha, did you want to
take that one?
So, definitely use Google Tag Manager, tag all your videos, implement pixels on your website. Any sort of tracking information you can implement on the front end and back end when you set up, especially meta campaigns. Definitely do that. And one thing I emphasize, do a test before you launch a campaign. There's been many times there's been times where brands are just in a rush to launch and they get delayed with MLR, but always take that time to do a Q&A just to make sure before you launch that there's no breaks in tags, ensuring that the data is coming through correctly. That's very important, and you'll be surprised how often that is not taken into action.
And I'll add one little piece on one of the brands we work on. We do a lot of organic content, and we have to have links in our CTAs because organic content doesn't have that button like a Facebook ad would have with the CTA. We've actually been working to create unique links, even if the ad is driving to the same site as a previous ad, we still create a unique link for that ad, a bit.ly, for example, because then we can track what action, like who came to that page on the site from what ad. If you have two ads that are driving to the same page, it may be hard to tell if you're using the same link who came from which ad or from which piece of organic content. But if you're using different links, then you can say, oh, this person came from ad 7 or from post 17, and this person came from post 31. So that's one way to also add like an extra layer on when you're talking organic specifically.
Great. Thank you all so much. We had so many great questions submitted today, and we didn't have time to get to them all, but we're going to try and get back to everyone who submitted personally after the webinar. I want to thank you all for attending this Fierce Pharma webinar and submitting all of those questions and interacting with our speakers. I'd also like to thank our speakers for participating and LiveWorld for sponsoring today's webinar. As a reminder, a recorded version of this webinar will be available for you to access within 24 hours using the same link that was sent to you earlier. Thank you again for joining, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.